There's very few things more beautiful than a calm sea at sunset, or a calm sea at moonlight, or dawn. And there's seldom more brutal things than a storm at sea. Those two ends of the spectrum are what are at play here in the film.
The film is a very simple story. It's about a guy late in his life who goes out for sort of a 4 or 5 month sail and has this sort of accident. Essentially, we just go on a 10 or 12 day journey with him as he fights to survive.
All Is Lost is an existential action movie about one man lost at sea fighting against the elements and himself.
Just the idea that a single person would be out in the middle of like the vast expanse of the ocean is very dramatic. It's very moving.
So it really centers on what this man does just to continue against obviously what are impossible odds.
Robert Redford plays our man. He is on a journey out at sea and finds himself up against the forces of nature where Mother Nature just doesn't let up on him.
Redford's character is an absolute, everyman. You don't know his name, you don't know exactly why he's there.
And I think it's fascinating to watch an actor whose face we know so well sit on that screen and wrestle with these huge life issues. And you think about guys his age, there's only a couple of those guys that you really want to see go through an adventure like this.
This isn't, a cast of 5, 10, 20. This is a cast of one. This whole project, rests on one actor. And it's fantastic to have an actor of this caliber.
And it's an amazing journey. It's an amazing, thrilling adventure film.
When he came to me, because of my age, he said, look, I wrote this with you in mind. When I read it, I said, Jesus, this is pretty tough stuff. And in fact, there was only one character in it, and there was no dialogue. I felt that kind of boldness was really exciting. I tend to lean towards things that are not so easily identifiable.
This is a movie that is, you're with him. So it's an adventure you get, as an audience member, get to go on, as opposed to get to watch.
The movie is trying to be as real as possible. I mean, Bob is in a lot of real situations himself. So we don't want to have the movie look, synthetic or artificial.
It sort of has the ambition, effects-wise, in terms of water, of a tentpole movie. Like, we have just a guy and his thoughts and his actions to save himself and sort of discover his own relationship to mortality.
No matter what we try to do with this planet, no matter what we try to build or destroy or whatever we're about, where we think we have a command, we're reminded again and again that nature is dominant. And finally, in the end, I think nature has control.
It's going to be a heck of a thrill ride. It's going to be exciting and exhilarating and terrifying. It'll be somewhat enlightening, hopefully, as well. So, if you can somehow figure out to combine those two things, where you entertain people and thrill them, but also show them something about the core of human beings, that's all I sort of hope to achieve. So I think there was something very simple about the story that kind of drew me to it. The challenge as a filmmaker certainly is what drew me to the idea. There's one actor, very little dialogue, and it's essentially sort of an extended action sequence. We had a very specific roadmap. I had storyboarded pretty much every scene in the film very extensively with my storyboard artist, and we actually had this wonderful boardroom, and it became, in a very sort of militaristic way, just an execution project and how we were going to accomplish this on a fairly limited budget. And action!
JC's a very confident director, and he has a very clear vision of his film before he gets into it. He spends a lot of time working out the story. He spends a lot of time on the material. He spends a lot of time researching, and so he has a very clear idea of what it is he's setting out to achieve.
He's very respectful. He's very smart. I think he is a visionary, but he's also relentless in pursuing his vision. He's a man of great detail. He does believe God's in the details. There's something relentless and determined about him that's pretty rock solid.
He's very specific in that he has a vision in his head and he's seeing it through. He knows what he's getting.
He's very confident, and he knows how to pick and choose what makes sense. And he knows sailing, too. This is a lot about sailing in this movie.
JC is very receptive. He has a really good knack for being super positive and very supportive. And he creates an environment where you want to sort of come up with the best ideas and only put the best ideas forward.
I think he's really good at inspiring people from a sort of teamwork standpoint, making sure that they feel heard while still maintaining a really solid leadership and vision control over the whole thing.
You know, part of what I really appreciate about JC is that I learn more about my process by working with him, because he does have such a specific vision that I don't always see eye to eye with. And it can take a long time, and it can take sort of a lot of refinement and a lot of back and forth. But I almost always come around to understanding why it was important.
He's actually a fantastic director from a sound perspective, because he gives you really great, very specific story direction and emotional direction. It's really awesome because you know that you're going down a path that he is interested in, but you can do it in your own way. So you have this freedom to be creative and expressive.
I think as a filmmaker, frankly, there were, very fundamental elements of this project that I found insanely challenging, and as a result, really exciting.
Introduce myself?
Yeah, not like you.
It's come to that, huh? Okay. Bob Redford, I'm in All Is Lost.
Working with Robert Redford was a dream come true, and Robert Redford is an icon of independent filmmaking as well as an actor.
The wealth and length of his career and the experiences that he's had, he's just a complete professional.
The role, the main character of our man, had to be sort of in his 70s. It was really a foundation of the project for me, was that it was someone, in the last couple chapters of their life.
It was special for me to do at this point in my life because it was so innovative and different. And also as an actor, that's how I started my career, as an actor. And that's probably still the best love of my life.
In a weird way, when I kind of brought together all the different elements and looked at it, there really only was literally one person, who could help us get the film made, and then, fulfilled all the creative elements I was looking for. And it came down to him. and luckily, within about 2 or 3 days of us giving him the script, he had gotten back to us and said that he wanted to meet with me.
He took a meeting with JC, and JC called me afterwards and said, listen, it's a very JC phrase, he says, we hugged it out, and he said he wants to do the movie, and all he needed to do was make sure I wasn't a crazy person, and I guess he decided I'm not crazy.
But the fact that he came to me and said, look, I wrote this with you in mind, that touched me. And when I read it, I thought, well, this is something exciting for me to do at this point in my life.
He admittedly, to me, has said that he was ready to just get back to purely acting. And as he was kind of making that decision in his career, luckily I kind of converged with this script on his desk. And he's always been drawn to sort of very difficult material.
I really believe that JC wrote this script with Bob in mind, and I don't think that Neil, JC, or I could imagine anybody else in this role. So for us, it was the biggest accomplishment.
There are really only so many people, who are in their late 70s or mid 70s or 70s at all that could withstand, the physical and frankly the emotional workout, that this project was going to take.
And I guess something just kicked into gear, and I thought, well, I'll do what I can. And when I did this much, he said, gee, it was more than I thought. Well, maybe we'll do an extra bit. I said, well, yeah, I can do that. And then a little extra. Next thing you know, I was doing most of the stuff. You have to somehow convey his indecision, his sudden burst of thought and solution, his wondering whether it's all worth it, wondering why it's happening to him. All these things are at play throughout the film, but you can only convey them with thinking. So for me, that's a wonderful challenge as an actor. You have to be completely involved in your character.
All the emotion and all the action that's happening is just happening on his face.
Bob came into the film very much saying, I believe in JC's vision. I believe in the story that he wants to tell here. I am not interested in being the director on this film. I'm not interested in being the writer on this film.
JC and Bob on set has been very interesting. You know, Bob's a director, so JC had to figure out how much Bob was going to give himself over to him, and we didn't know that.
The best way I can serve this man and his vision is to just give myself over to him completely. Don't look at any film, don't look at any dailies, don't look at the monitor, just be in the character and do what you have to do. And that was the right thing to do. It felt good.
I think it said a lot about how Bob approached this movie, which was he put himself in JC's hands.
But to his amazing credit, he had just come off directing a film, and I think, you know, he was really looking forward to fully committing himself just as an actor.
There was a moment very early in prep where I rode a bike around the studio lot in Mexico. Saw about 200 people working on various things, and there were 3 40-foot boats and 20 million gallons of water filling up a water tank, and green screens being hung and stages being outfitted, and an office building full of all our crew members and team members. Where, you know, JC and I had a moment, we're like, it's like a big little movie here. This is definitely big film, small budget.
We amazingly have a crew, I think, of 150 in all different parts of special effects, visual effects, you know, a marine department, which is a huge sort of third arm of kind of special effects.
I don't think any of us have ever worked on a project where we've had a marine unit, where we've had a special effects unit, where we've had a stunt unit. You know, all those elements combined are unusual for an independent film.
Not an easy film to make. Inside of a boat that's filling up with water, storms are washing over this way and that way, waves are crashing.
You know, we were against the best advice of a lot of really great producers. We were dealing with water, we were dealing with boats, we were dealing with an actor who isn't 25, we were dealing with sharks and sea life and shooting on the open ocean in the Bahamas, off the coast of Mexico, off the coast of California. We filmed a shipping container vessel that's the size of the Empire State Building on its side, and filmed it for real in the Pacific Ocean, communicating with the captains on the boat. All that stuff takes a huge amount of coordination.
They had a great crew. I mean, my God, I mean, what they were able to put together with the budget they had, which is very low, how they were able to pull in all these elements that would have been so costly, how they were able to maneuver and manipulate things to get the maximum effect, I think is a tribute to the producers, Neil and Anna. I think they did a great job.
I mean, there are people in this movie that are the top people. I mean, best boat drivers, best marine people there are. So even though it's a small budget, it's a small group, we have some of the best players involved.
There's a spirit of resourcefulness and a spirit of adaptability. Rather than patterns being entrenched, there's a kind of freshness to all these questions that arise and how problems are solved. I've absolutely loved that.
We've done pretty much everything that you can do to a boat. Sunk it, brought it back to life, sailed it, then put it through a massive, massive storm, then put our man through all these paces. You know, the stunt team, the special effects team, and the marine team have manipulated them underwater, above water, in and out of water, in every way that you sort of feasibly could.
We have 3, boats that our marine team helped source that were matching identical boats. We have a hero boat, we call her Tahoe. We have a boat called Tenacious, which is our exterior effects boat, and we have a boat called Orion, which is our interior effects boat. And between the 3 of these boats, we were able to do some pretty remarkable things.
I get excited when I see scripts that have so much water, because I specialize in putting cameras in places that are very wet. From the very first moment of the script, there's water flowing into the boat. He's immersed in water. The boat's flooding. He's going to be underwater. Waves are dumping. It's pretty exciting for me to see so much water in a script.
The logistics were very, very complicated. How you're gonna move 3 boats between 3 tanks on which days with which masts, with which gash repair plugs in place, our marine team had down.
Every action in the film was supposed to feel very much in the realm of possibility.
I know boating, but I don't know sailing, and they're different. And so that was something I had to learn. I had to learn about what it's like to be a sailor, and particularly be a sailor in hard conditions.
It's all real, you know. That's the other thing I think about the movie. We've got VFX in the movie, obviously, but there's no VFX, there's no replacing of Bob.
So I wanted no one stunt to feel sort of superhuman or out of the ordinary. You know, we tried to shoot as much of this film with practical effects so that the real things that were happening to the character were happening to with Mr. Redford, which we were amazingly able to do with our, with our wonderful team on set. There was a huge element of having to then add to that, using in a very limited but precise way, to use, compositing and bringing, back plates of storms into what we had done in the foreground.
And a film that has no dialogue depends so much on all the sound effects and all the music and all those little pieces and all the visual effects that there are. To see it all sort of come together is really how this film takes its life on.
I think what makes All Is Lost such a different film to work on is the fact that it is very much about mood and it's very much about action. It's sort of pure editing based on movement, and it's really editing based on emotion and on feeling.
We managed to find ourselves here at Skywalker, which has been just such a huge advantage for this movie. It was very little of our production sound from Mexico and from our trips out on the ocean was usable.
Describe the project as having very few lines in it, almost all entirely a boat at sea. I mean, it was just a sound editor's dream, basically.
There's not really a lot of stuff around to make sounds like that are obvious. So you can't have birds because he's way too far from land. You can't have a lot of the typical winds you would have because the wind would make sound off of trees and things around you, which we don't have. So you have to create this whole environment and keep it exciting with just sound effects and sound design. It's been a blast.
My first reaction actually was after a conversation with JC before I had seen anything. I hadn't seen the script, I hadn't seen the movie. I knew kind of what it was about. He had this crazy enthusiasm about it, wanted to talk about sound, and one of the things he talked about was that they shot the movie in a way that you're almost always at the same eye line with Robert Redford on the boat. So you're there with him, you're experiencing what he's experiencing, and you're hearing what he's hearing. And he wanted to kind of apply that same approach to the sound. JC designed this movie to have sound play a big role. He wanted it to start in the black. He wanted the first thing about this movie to be the sound. If you listen, you just hear quiet sleeping sounds and quiet water lapping. It sounds peaceful. It's almost like a womb or a cocoon. And then all of a sudden the outside world just comes crashing in. The sound of the boat hitting the container is way more dramatic than it probably would be in reality. And that was part of taking JC's idea of the perspective thing and just making things bigger than they had to be. We decided to treat the boat as if it was another character. So we have a Robert Redford character, we have the boat, and then we have the outside world. Most of the sounds a sailboat makes when you're sailing on it are things you're not looking at. You've got the mast that's going over here, you've got the lines up above, you've got water hitting the bow and the front, but it's also splashing along the side and then the back. So if we were going to try to be there with Redford the way the cinematography is done, we need to kind of recreate that whole experience.
You can't have birds, you can't have anything that's not in the middle of the ocean. So there are only so many sounds that we could use. So we couldn't use a lot of like sound designy moments or elements that didn't actually have a sense of reality to them.
We shot the film in a style so that the camera never really leaves the main character's side. It stays right there with him. And the sound has to be right there with the audience. The audience is basically getting to, it's an experiential film if it's anything else. So the audience gets to be right there with him.
We use various techniques to enhance those moments. When the storm is raging at sea, one of the ways you can increase tension and also make the storm sound even louder is to take things that would normally be loud, like Bob taking the life raft package and slamming it on the back of the boat, and you play it very quietly so the audience can barely hear it. So it does two things. One, it makes you realize that the storm is really loud because you can barely hear this thing that would normally be quite loud. And it also makes the audience tense because they have to kind of reach for the sound. They're used to things being much more clearly audible, and whether it be breathing or vocalizations or these effects and footsteps or whatever you would normally hear, they're all kept very low.
Initially, as I was working on the container when he gets out and he jumps on it, my idea was to have it have sounds that are unlike anything that we've heard on the boat. I wanted to be kind of fierce, so it's got this sort of screeching metallic sounds. I wanted to have a lot of low end to give it a sense of weight, that this thing just bumping into the boat was enough. It's actually probably a good lesson for new filmmakers at storytelling and using sound as part of the story, because they didn't have to show the boat coming crunching in. Same thing at the beginning of the movie. They didn't have to show the boat hitting the container, but you get all of the collective imagination of the audience filling in the gaps, probably better than you could have shot it.
We had a very small team, and Steve and I were cutting most of it. Richard Hims was dealing with how, when we were doing stuff. When Steve and I were cutting, we had to come up with a game plan, so we didn't actually do the same stuff. Because a lot of times, editors will work on one chunk and the editor works on the other chunk, and you're concerned, about your whole reel.
Brandon was focusing on anything to do with Bob, the Redford character, his Foley, his movement, his breathing, how he interacts with things on the boat. I was doing his world, which for the most part was the boat, or when the wild intruded in and conflict was created.
Since there aren't other people to talk to in the film and there's no dialogue, we had to be constantly evolving the sound. And the ocean is always changing as it is. Sometimes there's parts of the boat we just didn't want to even hear. You just want to hear what Bob is doing, and it's just kind of there with him.
When I first got the movie and there was no music, I thought it was perfect. I loved being oppressed in the way that he was being oppressed by the sort of largeness of the universe. One of the things JC, I think, initially took me on for was he got a sense of something about layering. He kept mentioning layering. I just see it as layers. It's layers. I don't know how to say it in music. Of course, you say it the same way, but I understood what he was saying. I had written a theme on the piano, but the theme on the piano, which is the main theme, which I think I've called Excelsior. Da 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 da. So it's almost in 3/4. It's like a waltz almost. But then when I started playing at the picture, I realized it would make no sense. So it's suddenly this very long, drawn-out version of that has no time. And so I didn't do any of the music to time at all, actually. I did it mostly to picture.
What we were trying to do is the further up the mast he goes, the further he gets from his comfort zone, the sounds of the boat. The sounds of the water washes away, the sounds of the boat like creaking start to go away. Even the mast sounds and the sail flaps are disappearing. And essentially we're with Redford. He is focusing on the task at hand. He wants to try to fix this antenna, try to fix this radio. And so he's getting to the top of the mast. We just hear the ratchet of him pulling himself up, the tinging on the side of the mast, and the little sounds at the top as he's going to kind of fix this thing. And then all of a sudden, there's thunder in the distance. I had just had kind of a regular storm approaching thunder, and JC kept wanting it pushed up and pushed up and pushed up to the point where it's like, this is crazy how big this is. Again, it was his perspective. JC started to refer to it as the oh shit moment, where this is all gonna go bad. This is where everything changes.
There was a lot of stuff in our library that we started going through. Towards the end, we got Andy Malcolm sent us a bunch of Foley. They actually got the raft sent to Andy in Canada and record in the raft, so that was great. So it matched perfectly. And then we had, just going out on the boat and actually recording sounds on the boat. And it was actually nice to go out there and go like, okay, this is what it sounds like. I actually kind of felt the danger of it, especially because we weren't really paying attention of the sailing, but just, recording all these different spots on the boat. And it gave us a real-world perspective on it.
It needed to be dangerous because we needed to feel like at any point this thing was going to go down. The other thing is that this is part of the evolution of the sound of the boat. The boat no longer sounds like it did before. JC and Redford did an amazing job between the two of them of having him always looking around. There's a couple times you could hear in the original production, JC would say, "Hey Bob, can you look up to the right real quick? You hear something?" Those are gold for a sound person because you can put something and attach something to that. When he did that in the underwater inside the boat, he suddenly looks down afraid. That was it. That was my cue. I just wanted it to be as oppressive and assaultive as possible, make it the biggest storm, and then we could dial it back from there, not realizing that JC really wanted to have it be the biggest storm ever, because in his mind, this is possibly the end of his life. This is the biggest storm ever to happen. And that kind of, for me at least, it sort of set the tone for how to approach things from a perspective of a POV, essentially.
Because there was such a lack of production, I had to look through a lot of wild takes to actually add to the film that was something from there that there was nobody talking on it, or especially like in the third reel where there's a storm, there's almost no production. There's just a couple little spots. So it's all recreated for the scene.
When we recognized what it was they were trying to do, this whole place, Skywalker Sound, all kind of pitched into like, we're going to find a way to make this happen. So I would say, for the general audience, this is something that you've never seen before. You're going to find something in this that's going to be different from everyone else in the room, and I think you'll dig it.
think I realized very early on that a story like this was not going to work if I just sort of said, oh, then the boat's gonna spin over, then he's gonna swim over here, and then he's gonna jump out, and then the movie's gonna be over. I really knew that I was going to need to know what I was doing beat by beat and second by second. More so than any other project I've ever taken on in my career, I realized storyboards were going to play an absolutely integral part in the planning and the execution of this production. My longtime collaborator on storyboards is a guy named Adrian Hashimi, and he's a brilliant artist, and we have a very good shorthand with each other. We sat down and went through image by image and scene by scene and thought by thought, you know, what I wanted. And we ended up with about, I think, 450 or 500 of these sort of still frames, which, when put together, became essentially the roadmap for actually executing the movie. So storyboards, which are essentially a graphic novel almost of a script. And normally on most movies, you just do that for sort of your most elaborate sequences so that we can all, as a filmmaking team, kind of come together. But in this case, we knew it was so elaborate and so complicated that we did it for the entire film. But once we got into production, the storyboard started to become sort of our Bible, and it was like, this is what we were going to accomplish today. This video is this kind of really fun thing that we did, and I wish there was, you know, some grand reason for doing it, but to be perfectly honest with you, I made this little film because, you know, it was probably 3 weeks, 2 weeks before we were going to start shooting and Robert Redford was going to show up on our set, and in the back of my mind there was always this nagging little question of, is this really a movie? You now have 200 people working on the film in Mexico, you've storyboarded the whole thing out, you're ready to go, but what is the movie actually going to be like? And I was pretty darn sure that I had an idea in my head, you know, a very, very specific idea, but in a way, just to kind of alleviate those nagging kind of insecurities in the back of our head, my two DPs, so the taller gentleman with the blonde hair is my underwater DP, and he is playing Mr. Redford in these sequences. And then I'm playing most of the weather sequences, so I'm like a wave or wind or the sail, and then my DP is shooting this on his little 5D, I think. And we are in the parking lot of the film studio. I don't even think there's water in the tank yet, but we were literally doing this to start to break down how we were going to shoot the film and what it was going to look like. And the neat thing that we did, which is a great trick if anyone out there is sort of interested in filmmaking that I hadn't really thought about, but what we actually did was hand over this footage to my editor without actually telling him what any of it was. And it was shot out of order, not traditionally, not terrifically out of order, but a little bit out of order. And we just gave him the footage, and in a weird way, it was a test where if he could kind of see what we were doing and come up with the narrative and actually piece it back together, seeing that the absurdity of this was in a boat that was still under construction, up on stilts in the parking lot of the studio. But we felt like if he could pull that together and actually make sense of it, we might be pretty good and be on our way to telling a story that's actually going to work. So this was just this fun pre-visualization that we did, and looking back on Pete Zuccherini as Robert Redford is kind of a neat thing where when you see it side by side next to the real guy playing that role, you see why Robert Redford is Robert Redford. But you also see that at the time we were filmmakers really just trying to figure out how we were going to visually tell this story. One of the interesting things in making the film was heading into it, I really was preparing myself for some of the more, what I thought were going to be some of the more difficult days on the shoot, which would be the stunts, the rolling the boat over, the storm sequences, these things where you really believe that those are going to be your most challenging days on set.
What I realized looking back on it was those days were sort of so exciting and frankly had everyone operating at such a high level of sort of concern, and everybody was paying attention and everyone was there, that those ended up being some of the more enjoyable and exciting days of the entire process. The most difficult thing that we realized going through this, kind of looking back on it, was kind of the tremendous emotional sort of monotony in a way, and the brutal idea that every morning when you woke up while shooting it, you just knew you were going to be sort of staring down one actor stuck in this horrific environment, and it was just going to be us and him, you know, and there was going to be no sort of variable and no break. And in a way, in the final weeks of shooting the film, we started to take on some of the same challenges, obviously to a much lesser degree, but we did start to take on some of the experiences that the character is going through. The key for this film for me that was so important was marrying those practical effects, those special effects, those things that are actually happening to the actor or the stunt person with the visual effects, which is what I think when a lot of people say special effects, it's what we think you're talking about, but those are really visual effects, and that is computer generated or compositing, which is taking one image from one place and the images that you shot with Mr. Redford in this case and kind of marrying them together. And our goal for that was to have those effects try to be as invisible as possible, so that they never felt like they were calling themselves out and saying, here's a big visual effects shot about a storm. What I wanted the visual effects to do for me in this film was to, wherever possible, try and create the greatest form of naturalism. What we tried to always do was feather those two worlds together so that hopefully they sort of disappear. But my team on this film, visual effects wise, I believe there's almost 300 visual effects shots in the film, but hopefully when you go home, you're not really thinking after seeing the film about any of them. When I'm there shooting, I want to know how it's going to be pulled off so that the performance is paramount. And the only way to do that is to be prepared and months in advance be thinking, what are these images going to look like? What am I trying to capture on film?